like stuff is just happening to her. She gets assigned her livelihood occupation, which is she's going to be a weaver. She gets assigned where to live and everything else, and she's kind of just like sitting there. She's like, "What just happened? Did I seriously just get married to this guy?" Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Everest M. Radley, author of Unhuman, and today we're going to be reviewing The Virtue of Sin by Shannon Schuren. At least I think I'm saying her name correctly. So this is her debut book. It came out in 2019, so very recently. And the whole thing obviously is going to be very religious. You probably have guessed that based on the fact that there's sin in the title, but it's all about cults, essentially. But before I get into the book and everything, a few things first. I want to talk about, the links in my channel, and ask you guys if you would be interested. Please give it a like and a follow and comment. It really helps me as a content creator to be able to produce more content if you're doing so. So please consider giving this a like and a follow. Also, I need to discuss my rules for how I go about reading and reviewing content, because that's going to be very important, especially as I really establish my reviews in the future. So first of all, my rule number one is I go in blind to everything. I do not go in to my TV series, books, anything, really knowing about what I'm about to watch, simply because I'm a firm believer that no matter what I'm consuming, whatever content or media, it should be able to stand up on its own without me necessarily needing to know a lot about it. Like, I don't believe that I should know the book blurb or know the author's backstory to be able to read a book. So I go in completely blind. I did not know anything about this book. I just knew it had cults in it. So that's going to change how I review. Furthermore, usually I get to the 60% mark and either I decide to pick it up or continue, or drop it or continue. The most recent series that I actually dropped was, believe it or not, Arcane. I plan on reviewing that and explaining why. But this series, or this book, I actually got all the way through to the very end, and I was really impressed with it despite it being a debut book. But this one was actually a pretty solid book. And lastly, the last rule that I want to explain about how I go into my books is my rating system. So I believe that every single book or every single piece of content that I consume should at least be a 5 out of 10. There should at least be some good things about it and some bad things about it. And so, like, you can kind of gauge how much I like the book depending on if it's above 5 out of 10. And thankfully this one was. I actually gave this book a 7 out of 10. So yeah, let's get right into it. The Virtue of Sin by Shannon Schuren. What makes it a good book? So first of all, the plot. The plot revolves around, and I should explain, I'm going to be very spoilery in this, so if you want to read the book, like, feel free to click off. But the plot revolves around two characters. It is a dual perspective coming from Caleb and Miriam. These characters are destined to be together. In this cult, there's this belief that God sends you dreams of who you're going to marry, and then when you turn 16 or 17, this is one of the more vague parts of the book, but when you turn a certain age, or whenever their prophet finally allows them to get married, they then have this big ceremony where almost everyone from that generation is brought together and they all get married. And the idea is that these boys or these men call out the names of these girls, and whoever's name they call out becomes their wife. And in order to know whose name they're supposed to call out, they're supposed to receive prophetic dreams from God, telling them this is who you're supposed to marry. So Caleb in the book has known since forever that he's going to marry Miriam. It's in all of his dreams. He's like literally obsessed. He's like, I'm gonna marry this person. And Miriam believes the same thing. She's been having dreams about Caleb as well. So she believes that this is obviously destined meant to be. And to further confirm that fact, even though there's like a rule saying that the youth aren't supposed to be interacting or speaking to each other, at one point Caleb does give her a secret message, which is like, I'm gonna pick you. Just so you know, like, I'm gonna pick you. So obviously these two characters are fully convinced that they are going to be together forever. And the book starts off on this sort of like marriage ceremonial note. So everyone's getting ready for this big marriage ceremony. Everyone's looking forward to it. Miriam is like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I've been waiting for this day for forever. And to further show how excited she is, she tries to go and sneak off and spy on Caleb and the other guys. And as she does so, she accidentally stumbles across our third kind of like main character named Aaron. And Aaron is, you don't really get a very good look at who Aaron is at the start of the book. He's very much, it feels like a plot device at the beginning of the book. But he has been bitten by a rattlesnake, and he's lying in the middle of the desert, dying. He can't get up and go call for help, and he has no idea like how to help himself. And these girls who have found him, Miriam and her friend, who also joined her to go spy on everyone, they look at him and they're like, oh my gosh, like if we don't do something, like he's gonna die. But at the same time, we're not supposed to touch him because we're not married women. So Miriam kind of just like, whatever, screw off, I'm going to save his life because I believe that God would rather me save his life than to let him just die. So she basically treats it, applies a mini tourniquet, sucks the poison out, and this is one of the most difficult parts of the book to believe, but he kind of just like, after a minute or two, even though he's like starting to feel better, he just kind of gets up and walks off. And you're like, oh, okay, that was kind of weird. But so continuing on, you finally get to the marriage ceremony. That happens like literally half an hour later. And as all these guys are reading out these names, you can't tell who's reading out whose name. But she hears her name being called. And so she goes to be like, oh my gosh, I'm falling in love with Caleb. This is my happy marriage, everything. And no, it's Aaron. Aaron called her name over Caleb. And once she realizes this, her whole world kind of like just freezes. Like she can't even process what's going on. Like stuff is just happening to her. She gets assigned her livelihood occupation, which is she's going to be a weaver. She gets assigned where to live and everything else. And she's kind of just like sitting there. She's like, what just happened? Did I seriously just get married to this guy? And Caleb, at the meantime, he was one of, I think, the third person to pick. So Aaron was in front of him. And once he realized that Miriam had been picked, he was like, well, if it's not going to be Miriam, it's not going to be anyone else. So he just straight up was like, peace, y'all. I'm out of here. And like super angry, by the way. And he leaves this whole thing. And they basically banish him. And they're like, you know what? You're going to go to the capital of our like little camp. You're going to sit there and you're going to think about what you did. Like, go sit yourself in timeout. And he's like, fine, I don't care anyway. I'm just going to go. And everyone's like telling him, this has serious repercussions. Someone's going to go unmarried and not going to be able to access the blessings of heaven because of what you did. Like, everyone is just super pissed off with what Caleb has done because he had to choose someone. He had to say a name of someone. And while he was basically standing there with this microphone, he had someone else's name come to mind, but he just didn't say it. Like, he was determined, if it's not Miriam, it ain't anyone. So that's where the whole beginning takes place. I'd say that takes up like the first 5 chapters or so. After that point, it gets a little bit slower. So we're seeing kind of Miriam adjust to her new married life with Aaron. And it's obviously not at all what she expected. First of all, she feels like super embarrassed and really, I don't know how to say this. Like, she's just like curling up inside of herself. She's like, don't touch me. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Like, you're disgusting to me. Kind of like that, like just knee-jerk reaction. And Aaron is like, I'm not gonna touch you. Like, I don't want to do anything with you. And then he keeps saying weird things like, this will all be over soon, so like, don't even worry about it. She's like, what are you talking about? We're married for life. Like, are you dumb? Are you dull? Like, where do you get off with this idea of, this is only going to be temporary? Like, you literally ruined my whole life. And meanwhile, Caleb is having an absolute mope fest. He's off by himself, and because he is not married, there is no one to do all of the work for him. Like, in this religious camp thing, it's all the females do all of like the traditional house cleaning, cooking, taking care of clothes and everything. So this guy is literally just starving and moping around, and he's not even trying to do anything for himself. Like, he straight up is just stealing food from either like council gatherings or other places. Like, he, in the face of survival, he's like, well, I don't have a wife to cook for me, so I'm just gonna give up. And well, I mean, that's probably one of the more difficult parts of the book to believe, is that like you're just giving up, but whatever. So that's like the next 5-6 chapters. And then finally Miriam starts to catch on to, there's something different about her and Aaron's relationship. Like, he absolutely seems to have no interest in her being his wife. And in fact, Aaron is kind of a weird character, because despite them being in this camp and in it having like grown up this way for a couple of years, Aaron is the one outsider, spoilers, but despite this whole setting, Aaron is totally different than what she expected. He cooks for himself, he cleans for himself, like, he even cooks and cleans for her too, when she doesn't want to, when she's being very stubborn. And she's just realizing like something's off about this. And he keeps saying things like, it's gonna be over soon, don't worry about it, like, don't worry, I'm just gonna protect you, it's okay, like, I know that you're upset with me, and what I did wasn't necessarily the brightest idea, but like, I just panicked, so I'm just gonna do my best to help you. And she's like, okay, well, there's like this point where they start to become friends, like, or at least mutual allies, where they realize that they're kind of stuck together no matter what they do. And even though Miriam is really angry at Caleb for calling out her name, she's still trying to deal with it and do the best that she can, because she's very religious and she really believes in this whole cult and all their ideas that they're spouting. So after we get past that brief honeymoon phase, we then move back into social society. And that is, now Miriam's being reintroduced to all of her friends and all of the people that she grew up with as now like a married woman. And that's where she starts to realize kind of everything went wrong. So Caleb comes to see her, and they realize that, like, he was actually going to call her name, and he is still in love with her, and he still wants to be with her, and she still wants to be with him. So, and they have like this little mini affair going on, because they're like 17 and they're just recently married. But meanwhile, her and Aaron basically have to put on a show for everyone else in this group, because, if she doesn't, she's gonna get banished. And the idea of being like permanently banished, like straight up left outside their gates, is they're in the middle of a desert. Like, this whole book takes place in a desert. So if you get kicked out, like permanently kicked out, you have to wander the desert and die. That is what their religion does, or is supposed to do. You're just supposed to wander out there and die. And she's like, I can't let that happen. Like, I've got family, I've got friends. Like, we need to come up with a plan. And Aaron's like, again, like, don't worry about this, I've got this. And on top of this, he's now saying things like, well, this wasn't a part of the plan. Like, you weren't supposed to be my wife. Things were supposed to happen differently. And that's when she starts to realize, like, something is like, what do you mean? Like, I thought you were supposed to call someone's name based on dreams. And Aaron is just like, straight up like, most of us don't even have dreams. Like, we're frankly told by our prophet who we're supposed to be marrying. And this is the kind of breaking point for Miriam, where she starts to like question everything that's going on with the prophet. And meanwhile, during the end of Caleb's moping fest, new developments are being made on his side in that he is now, since he's a lone wolf, he is now selected for the security council for their prophet. And on top of that, their prophet is telling him, like, you should be grateful that you didn't get married to Miriam. She's a temptress, like, she's a snake. Yeah. And so Caleb's like, really? Like, she is? And he's just soaking this up. He's like, but I loved her. Like, we were just together and, like, I thought we had a connection. And their prophet's like, no. You should be happy that you are alone in this situation. Like, even though you should have called another name, at least you did not get stuck with that snake. And Caleb's like, well, all right, I guess this is the way this is. Like, if the prophet says that she's a snake, then obviously she's a snake. Which, spoiler alert, obviously she's not. And he's just making stuff up to get him to be more cooperative to his goals. But needless to say, that's kind of the turning point for the main characters, is they're starting to realize, okay, things are changing, things are happening, nothing is really making sense according to what they know, but they're still just trying to go with it because this is all they've known. Like, this is their whole culture, their whole community. And then everything starts to unravel, finally, with Miriam and Aaron and their big plot reveal. So Aaron comes out, and in one of their fights where Miriam's like, you want to know what, like, I can't do this, like, I wasn't supposed to be married to you, like, you've ruined my future. Like, Aaron just, like, he breaks down finally, and he's like, Miriam, you need to understand the situation. This is a cult. And she's like, she's grown up in this community herself. Aaron's an outsider. So Miriam has no clue what any of this is. She's only ever read the Bible. She's like, what's a cult? And that's probably one of the funniest parts of this whole book. But he's like, yeah, this is, like, your prophet's super sketchy. He's not real. Like, just stop and think about this. And he's like, on top of this, I'm gay. He's like, I don't have any interest in you, and I'm not going to sleep with you or do anything with you because I'm gay, and I have a boyfriend outside these walls. And she's like, wait, again, there's, like, that whole processing. She's like, wait, what? What do you mean you have a boyfriend? She's like, do you know that's against God's word? And he's like, oh my gosh, not you too. And this whole part was actually the best part of the book, in my opinion, because it was just straight up comical. I loved this kind of, like, awkward interaction between someone who obviously is, like, now you're like, okay, this person obviously doesn't believe everything that they're learning here, and, like, they have no intention to follow this, and seeing somebody who's, like, super, like, hardcore, like, this is the word of God, this is the way that things are supposed to be, and she's just, like, having, like, this little mini meltdown. She's like, I don't understand. Why would you pick someone to marry if you're gay? Like, if you like men, you should have switched places with Caleb, gone without marrying anyone. And he's just like, I would explain, but honestly, you need time to process, and I want to keep you safe. And the more you know, the more you put us both in danger, which is fair. So Aaron gives her some time to digest basically all that comes out, and they actually have these moments of, like, conversations going forward where they talk, and they actually become friends at this point. Like, they're just straight up like, you want to know what? I may not love you romantically or be interested in you in that way, but we are at least friends, and we can at least support each other in that way. And meanwhile, Caleb just kind of is off doing his own thing. He's continuing the moping party now that he's seeing Aaron and Miriam about all the time. And after he actually talks to Miriam and realizes that the prophet is just making stuff up and, like, she's not actually the temptress that he says she is, he's kind of, like, free-flowing. He's trying to gain information and he's trying to figure out what is going on. And this is the part that's very info dumpy. You get parts where he's talking to he's talking to this older lady that's involved in their camp who's also unmarried. And you get a little bit of information out of that. You see him sneak into the office and hear some discussions from the prophet himself, basically being all dictator, like, all this needs to go this exact way, everything's going wrong, yada yada yada. Like the whole like blow up, he's hearing that. He also finds documents, letters from the courts and stuff, addressed to their prophet that he's supposed to be, he's not supposed to be seeing, but are obviously very important. So it's very info dumpy on Caleb's section. Meanwhile, he's also being very like, I'm an angsty 17-year-old boy, like, yeah. But the overall plot comes to a head when Miriam finally accepts that everything that's going on around her isn't as real as she thought it is. And with the help of Aaron, he actually introduces her to his family. Spoiler alert, Aaron is actually not related to the people that he claims is his family. He's actually a 24-year-old male who is a private detective working with other private detectives. But yeah, so after she starts to have these discussions and she realizes that everything's not as clean or as pure as she thought it was, she's like, okay, I don't really understand everything that's going on around here, but I agree in the fact that you're right, this is wrong, like there's things that are going on that are wrong, and I don't support them. And meanwhile, Caleb is having an entirely like mental breakdown. He's like, he's realizing that he's in the middle of a cult. He doesn't know what it's called, or how to process, or how to stop, or do anything about it. So he decides he's going to try to take things into his own hands. And he's trying to, I don't know how to say this, like, solve everything himself. But also not quite, because, like, he's honestly just doing it for very selfish reasons. Like, he believes at this point that if he can somehow persuade the prophet to ruin Aaron and Miriam's marriage, that he can then marry Miriam, and he's on an emotional mental breakdown at this point. Like, nothing that he's thinking or saying or doing is making any sense, but he's still trying to do stuff because, like, he's just angry and bitter, and he wants to do something. So this is kind of where everything comes to a head. The prophet finds Caleb and Aaron, who tried to go help Caleb and stop him from doing something dumb, and he finds them together, trying to steal one of his vehicles to go outside, and he basically locks them in a pit of snakes, like a water-filled pit of snakes. Meanwhile, Miriam is like, she gets told, your husband's been arrested and he's gonna get banished and everything's going on, and like, they're like, okay, now this is the coming of the Lord, and everything is just kind of like going crazy. The prophet's like, this is the end of the world, like, you better pray that your name is in our holy books, otherwise you're never gonna make it to heaven. And Miriam's like, oh my gosh, my husband's been arrested, and where is everyone, and what is everything going on? I thought we were supposed to be protecting people and saving people from this cult. And Caleb's just like, I don't understand what's going on, I'm just mad at everything and everyone. And that's kind of where the book ends. And I mean that literally, because there's a point where, like, Miriam gets up to confront their prophet in front of this whole, like, congregation of people, and right after she confronts the prophet, the book just, like, is like, and they escaped, and that's the end. There is an epilogue where we get to see Miriam outside the walls with Aaron, and they're kind of just being friends and chilling. And they're discussing, like, what is going to go on and what's going to happen now that it's been revealed publicly that there's a cult, and that they've been using people and trying to do child marriages and everything like that. At that point, we also think that Caleb is dead, because you're given like a little brief explanation about what happened that night. And it's like, after Miriam confronted their prophet, Caleb tried to shoot their prophet, and then that led to there being so much chaos that the building went up in flames, and people think that Caleb just died in the fire. Like, that's a literal paragraph of information that you're just given. Like, you don't actually see any of that, you're just given it. But yeah, that is the whole plot for this book. And there are some, as we've been discussing, obviously there are some parts where you're like, a pit of snakes, like, what is Caleb doing? Like, there's some obvious parts where it just sounds rough, even describing it. But as I said, I still gave this a 7 out of 10. So let's discuss about what actually went really, really well for this book. And the number one thing that I'd have to say is the fact that it didn't follow that YA trope love triangle. Like, it would have been so easy to have Aaron in that situation be the obvious good guy, or like the better guy, like the guy that she should have ended up with in the first place, and have her fall in love with him. That would have been so easy. And for most people, for most authors, I feel like that's probably what they would have done in the first place. But I think that the approach of, instead of having them be lovers or even romantically interested, just having them be friends and like genuine, decent friends, I think that was a much better way to go about the story. Because, like, we could have had a whole rebirth of the YA trope, but we didn't, and I'm glad that that didn't take that direction. Furthermore, the religion and like the cult aspects in this book were so good. They were really well thought out. There are parts where obviously there's the whole name calling part where only the guys are supposed to be calling the names and they're not supposed to be talking to each other. Like, that whole idea of segregation, of child marriages, of cultural pressure. It was obvious that the author really knew what they were talking about, like they had done their research, and that they were really proud of what they were writing, because it just is so well put together. I honestly could believe that is a legitimate cult that currently exists. That's how well it's put together. If you told me, like, if this appeared on the news and you told me, like, that's real, I would have no doubt believing, yeah, okay, that's real, because it's so well put together, and there's actual Bible verses that are woven in through the text, and they're used correctly. I've actually studied the Bible for a couple years, so, like, I was really impressed to see that, they're doing well with the whole religion aspect. And furthermore, I really like the idea that like the whole private detectives, and they're trying to get information on this cult, because that is a legitimate thing that needs to happen. Like, it happens in real life where people have to essentially go undercover in these situations to find information because they're really protective and skeptical towards outsiders. So it makes sense that there are multiple detectives who are working together simultaneously, trying to put all the pieces together, get all the information that they can, and trying to save as many people as they can. Those plot details were super good. I really loved it, and honestly, it made the book way more enjoyable to read, because if this had just been like, oh, this girl's finally coming to this conclusion that, like, maybe things aren't the way that they seem, and there's no valid, like, driving reason for why everything should be happening, I don't think it would have been as interesting if it had been different. So those were some of the aspects that I really, really liked the most about the book. The parts that were the roughest, obviously there were some of the setting things, like the whole idea behind Aaron gets bitten by a snake, there's a pit of snakes. Growing up in the desert, personally, I just gotta, like, it makes me feel like the author has never lived around here, because I guarantee rattlesnakes are not very common. Like, you can't just find them everywhere you go. And they're even more likely to be where there's a lot of human interaction and human spaces, simply because snakes like to live in warm, dark places, and especially like really, really small places. Like, it'd be very easy to find a snake like in a hole or a little crevice in like a rock face or something, but no, apparently we just found this rattlesnake in the middle of the desert. And on top of that, this whole idea of like there's a pit of snakes. Where did all these snakes come from? Like, where did they get the snakes? Did they just have them on hand Like, why would they have rattlesnakes on hand? There's nothing in this religion that's like, we need to have a sort of symbolical spiritual animal and it's going to be this rattlesnake. Like, there's nothing about that in this whole thing. So just having these two boys basically thrown into a pit of snakes was kind of weird. It's obviously like very religious, very much like the Daniel in the lion's den, where Daniel gets thrown into a lion's den, but it just felt so out of place and kind of goofy. I think that it could have been done better because during that scene, there's a huge rainstorm going on, and this pit that they've been thrown in is quickly filling up with water. So, like, you could have just left it with, oh, they're trapped in a pit and it's filling up with water, they could potentially drown. That's a legitimate thing that could happen, especially with desert flooding. That just happens so fast. Like, entirely believable, entirely plausible, but it just didn't happen. There was a pit of snakes in there for some reason. Super confusing. The next thing that really bothered me was the character. So, first of all, like, Caleb as a POV, like as a point of view, is kind of useless. He has a couple moments, like a handful, kind of just like sprinkled throughout the book, where you're like, okay, that was interesting, or like, okay, that added to something. But honestly, I feel like some of the things that he experienced and that he went through didn't even add that much value. Like, you probably could have gone the whole book without knowing, oh, there's courts and stuff going on outside that are trying to sue this place. Like, that's valuable information for us to have as the readers. But all that does is that brings up more questions and more things that we need to know about outside. Like, what kind of lawsuits are going on? How are people feeling about these lawsuits? Is there a public scandal going on? Are people trying to get information? Like, there's so many questions that then get brought up because of just like this one little piece of information. So really, I think it would have been better just to be like, cut that out and have people wonder, like, where are the news outlets? Where's all this stuff going? Because once you have that start, I feel like you have to keep going and you have to keep explaining and offering more information. It would have been easier just to let people wonder for themselves, kind of like what's going on the outside, than to actually provide some sort of information. So needless to say, I think that for the most part, Caleb's point of view could probably just be cut from the book. I feel like Miriam's perspective was definitely the much stronger perspective. And on top of that, like, one thing that I noticed as I was reading the book is that all of the male characters were just off. So all of the female characters were very diverse. They were very well written. You know, you had very gentle, very loving female characters. You had female characters that were like, you know, very spiteful and very angry. You had some that were just straight up brats. Like, there was a variety of female characters. But for the male characters, it seemed like there was only ever two emotions. There was either their default emotion, or like whatever character trait they were started off with, and then there was anger, like straight up like violent verbal abuse anger. And even for the characters that you wouldn't think that it would come from. So like Caleb, throughout multiple points throughout the story, he's like either like confused, like that seems to be like his default emotion. It's like kind of confused, but like his anger side is like he's punching stuff, like he's throwing stuff, like he's angry. And there's multiple points in the book where he's just like straight up like, I'm angry, I'm gonna go punch something, or, you know, I'm gonna go punch someone. He literally at one point punches Aaron because he is like, you know for a fact it should have been me who called Miriam's name and all that. Like, it was just straight up nuts. And Aaron even had a moment of physical violence too. Keep in mind, Aaron is 24 years old. Like, he's acting or pretending to be a 17, 18-year-oldish. But he is 24. And he's from the outside. So he has grown up under different beliefs and ideas. And so at this point, like that part in the book where he's acting physically violent kind of blew my mind, because he takes a glass, like he's drinking a glass, and he and Miriam are getting into an argument, and he chucks the glass at the wall, and the glass kind of explodes, and one of the pieces actually come back and they hit Miriam in the face, and it kind of cuts up her face. And it's like, why is this guy, the guy who's supposed to be the good guy, and he's the detective, why is he having outbursts of anger? Like, I was just like, why? Why is this going on? This doesn't make any sense. But every single character, like every single male character except for two, I actually counted it, except for two characters, had that problem. One of the people who was not the people who had the problem was the other male detective. He was actually probably the softest, sweetest, most genuine male character in the whole cast, and the other that did not show any anger was just a side character. You only see him for like 3 or 4 scenes, and he doesn't say much more than a couple of lines. So it's not like you're even given the chance to have anything angry. But yeah, literally every single character, the Prophet, Caleb, Aaron, even random characters like Caleb's brother. Caleb's brother has fits of anger as well, which is kind of just mind blowing. I'm like, oh, does the author just not know how to write male characters, or is there something they're trying to get across here? Like, are they trying to say that people who grow up in cults tend to be like extremely abusive and violent? Like, I wasn't sure where the direction was going with that, if it was just inexperience or if there was an actual message that was trying to be sent there. And the last thing that I really struggled with this book was kind of the plot twists that were going on, because like the idea of Aaron being gay was such as I did not see that coming. I was so surprised with that, but at the same time, it kind of just left a feel like it left something like a weird feeling, in your gut, where you're just like yeah, that's entirely plausible and that's okay, but like you're like, why would a gay man go into an extremely potentially dangerous cult if they're openly gay? Like, and if that's who they are, why would they risk that? Because I mean, and at one point, Aaron even says like, yeah, the Prophet even knows I'm gay. Like, so why would there's just like a lot that I feel like wasn't answered with that whole I'm gay plot twist. It was good and it was shocking when I first read it, but like looking back at it and wondering, like why would he reveal that he's gay, and why would the Prophet accept him as a gay person? Like, if they're so extremely religious, why would he do that? That just doesn't make much sense. But the number one plot twist that did not make any sense to me is why Aaron chose Miriam in the first place. So when you're getting introduced to all of the characters in the cast, Miriam's basically going through all the girls and being like, well, this is how this character is, and this is what I think of her. And she goes to the youngest character is 14, and her name is Delilah. And she's the one person who actually ends up unmarried because of Caleb's decision to not marry anyone. But it's like she's 14 and she's the youngest, the most vulnerable in this position. So when Aaron comes forward and he's like, this wasn't the plan, I wasn't supposed to pick you, I was actually supposed to pick this other girl. What really bothered me is like, if you're an actual detective and you're there to protect people, and like even if your plan goes wrong, why wouldn't you just pick the youngest person? Because she's 14. Like, chances are that she could have probably been paired up with somebody who is 20 or 18 or 19. So like, why not aim for the youngest person to try to protect them? Like, even if you had this other plan that was going on to try to bring down this cult and that failed, why not just go with a backup plan of like, okay, then I'm just gonna pick the youngest or the next youngest person and try to protect them. Like, this whole idea that he just chose Miriam because he saved him from a snake bite and that she was kind, like, that's great. And like, I'm glad that he recognizes kindness, but I feel like he's risking everything to be there in the first place. He's risking his life, his safety, his future with his boyfriend, because they actually talk about that when in between their like little friendship chats. They're like, well, how's your relationship with your boyfriend? And Aaron's like, he didn't support me coming here. So like, why would you risk so much to not even protect the people who are the most vulnerable and the most innocent? I didn't get that. I didn't understand that at all. And like, it's a completely valid question. Why Miriam? Is it just because we want her to be picked as the main character? Or like, I don't know. That part was definitely like a gaping plot hole, and I feel like there needed to be more explained to it and more a more solid answer than just saying, well, I panicked or I thought you were kind. Because like he's 24 years old. He's not just a regular teenager, right? So that was kind of like the good and the bad. What are my overall final thoughts on this book? My final thoughts are this book was probably could have been cut down a lot. Caleb's perspective probably could have been entirely just cut. There's about another 20-30 pages that could have been cut from Miriam's perspective. Overall, I liked the book. I read it in like 4 or 5 days, which is really unusual for me. It usually takes me like a week or two to get through a book. So yeah, I kind of just breezed through this. I really thought that the later part of the book with Aaron and Miriam's relationship and how they turned into friends and how Aaron was kind of just explaining the world to her, I thought that was funny because Miriam had such genuine weird reactions. Like they're not written poorly, as in like they're weird, like why is that happening? They're just weird. We're like, she's like, what do you mean you can choose what job you do on the outside? Like, and they were just comical, and I really enjoyed it. It was like a super cute friendship, aside from Aaron throwing the glass at the wall. The plot twists were kind of a hit or miss for me, and again there were some like weird character gaps, like with the anger and like the whole setting gap. That kind of just made me wonder if the author had ever lived in the area. Oh, one more thing that I forgot to mention that is on the same topic. There was a point in the first chapter where Miriam is like, oh, they're gonna see me. I'm gonna hide behind this tree. Like, what tree? It's a desert. We don't have trees around here. But yeah, like there was stuff like that where it's just like, have they lived here? Because this just seems kind of weird. And the ending I feel like is going to be such a hit or miss for most people. I feel like they're either going to really, really love the ending. They're going to be like, you want to know what? I'm glad that Aaron and Miriam's friendship is continuing on and that they're beyond the walls and that Miriam's safe. Or they're going to be like, what do you mean? Like, we get one paragraph of summarized description. I'm kind of in the middle. I think that it was both a smart and a kind of risky choice to go have this paragraph instead of doing the actual scene. It's smart because it allows the readers to imagine how things actually happened, and it does leave a gap to have another book where maybe Caleb actually isn't dead, or maybe things are going to happen. But do I think that it was the best choice for the situation? No. I feel like there is some other way that probably could have been done that would have been smoother and would have been easier. Plus I just know for a fact that ending is going to cause so much diversity, like between readers. Some people are going to love it and some people are going to hate it. So it's a really risky ending to have as your debut book. But it does open for another book, so that's good. The problem though is like, where do you go with the next book? Because all of the cult stuff, like we just watched all the cult stuff go up in flames. And when you're doing the whole ending scene with Miriam and Aaron where they're talking, they're like, well, what's going to happen now? And Aaron's like, well, it's got to be a court thing. Like, it's all going to be lawsuits and stuff. where do you go with that? And honestly, I feel like there's only a few directions that you could actually take it. And that is that, there's a giant time skip where Miriam basically becomes a private detective like Aaron, and they're teaming up to go essentially fight her own father, or her own religious group or whatever, in this, like, in a new cult, because like cults rebirth cults, like that's a common thing that we see in our climate, like in a realistic sense. So it wouldn't be at all like difficult to be like, oh, her father or some relative or someone starts up this cult again. It's more strict than ever before. It's more dangerous than ever before. And like she's got to go back in, like as an unrecognized person. That would be one way that we could take the series. Another way is like keeping it very close to the actual previous plotline, and that is treating it more like a terrorist situation. So Miriam and Aaron think they're safe. They've escaped the cult. In reality, what they don't know is that they're actually being hunted, and they're trying to be brought down because they ruined everything. And like they're the blame for everything. That would be another good way that you could take this. But I don't see that one going beyond a second book. Like that would be a duology, and it would be much more of a thriller than it would be like a YA. We're discussing cults and we're discussing the freedom of thought and originality and all that stuff. So I thought this book was very good debut book. I was very impressed. And I actually would recommend reading it through for yourself, simply because there's a lot of messages and a lot of content that I feel like needs to be had, especially for younger audiences. And that is, don't just buy into groups and organizations and beliefs so casually. Like, I feel like especially with this social media generation, it is so easy to see somebody on a screen or to hear about some sort of group or some fashion brand or whatever, and then be like, buy from them once or see them once, and then just fall head over heels with them. And we're seeing right now, like, that's coming out. A lot of people are coming forward, and they're openly admitting, I was in this group with this YouTuber or with this social media star or with this musician, and there were a bunch of me and these other people, and I feel like I was taken advantage of or something bad. Like there's all this stuff happening all the time on social media and on the news. So I feel like this book has a very important message that needs to be shared with pretty much everyone, especially the younger they are. Because it's so easy to just buy into something these days. Like, so long as you have internet access, you can access almost anything, good or bad. So it's a very important message for a book, and I'm glad that it did it as good as it did. I was very impressed overall with this book. But anyway, I'm rambling. This book was definitely a 7 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. And if you guys are interested in it, please pick it up. I think you will enjoy it too. Silliness and some things aside. But yeah, if you want to see more content from me, especially content on my book, because I'm an author, feel free to check out my profile or the links that I have listed. I do have the first free chapter to my book up, so you can read that for free. Also all the purchase links and everything. So yeah, if you want to support me as a content creator, I would love it and really appreciate it. But until next time, guys, I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.